I love indie games. In a world filled with AAA games that feel like cash grabs without any soul in it, or have a price tag that is just far too big for a student like me, these games are able to bring back something that I am not able to find with recent games. At least when I'm not playing them with friends. And that is genuine enjoyment. Indie games like Hollow Knight, Omori, Sky Children of the Light and so on have always been able to get my attention and make me invest a lot of time into them. And I think that it makes quite a lot of sense. These games were all made by people that didn't really have a name in the gaming industry, but were driven solely by their passion for the world that they wanted to create. Even though they might not have the resources of industry giants like, I don't know, Rocksteady, I will never forgive them for what they did to the Arkhamverse. Their blood, sweat and tears were able to construct some of the most charming and beloved games in the industry. And today, I wanted to talk about one of these games that I enjoyed the most last year. Ender LIlies, Quietus of the Night. Ender LIlies is the first game published by the Japanese studio Binary Haze Interactive, and it's a Metroidvania. For those who do not know, Metroidvanias are 2D platform games that have large interconnected maps. The name comes from the two parents from the genre, Metroid and Castlevania. The games always start really humble, with the characters only having the most basics of attacks, a jump or maybe a dodge ability. Most of the time you won't even be able to explore a lot of the areas you pass through completely, due to you not having unlocked different abilities that are in the game. These abilities most likely are locked behind boss fights, puzzles and other minigames. This system is quite crucial to the identity of Metroidvanias, as abilities are directly connected with your progression in the game. Every time you unlock a new ability, you might as well just start revisiting many of the rooms of the map that you went through to search for items, secret rooms or just straight up progress with the game. While Metroid and Castlevania are the parents of the genre, the face of the Metroidvania genre for quite some time now is Hollow Knight. The game is commonly seen as a masterpiece in the gaming community. I might even say that it's almost perfect. It also is one of the games like Undertale and Omori that showcase the true potential of indie games and how they can rival industry leaders, hell, even surpass them. But enough sidetracking, this was an Ender LIlies video. Ender LIlies starts out great with a greyish dark start screen. When greeted by the title of the game, we also get introduced to one of, if not the best aspect of this game, its music. The piano that occasionally drops a far lower notes, the snare instruments and, most importantly, the rain sound effects instantly create this feeling of melancholy. The first time I booted the game up, I legitimately took my time to listen to the music and just think, getting lost in my thoughts while checking my settings. Trust me, one of the things that Ender LIlies nailed, I might even say better than Hollow Knight, is the music used in the game. But more on that later in the video. After actually clicking the start button, you are met with a short cutscene where our main character, Lily, wakes up. It is then that we meet the Umbral Knight, our companion for this journey, in what seems to be a laboratory of some sorts. When starting the game, we don't really get anything explained about the world or the circumstances that we are in. Furthermore, Lily and the Umbral Knight themselves do not know what is happening in the world, as it seems that they both got hit with amnesia. The ambience at the starting area is kind of eerie. The laboratory we reside in is worn out, there is no background music and so the only things we can hear are the sounds that Lily and the Knight make, intensifying this eerie feeling even more. The first thing I did was explore the area by going to the left, and while I found the very first notes, which are the records needed to understand the lore of Ender LIlies, I also found the first thing I obsessed over in this game, a locked door. It just stood there, taunting me, and if I tried to interact with it, it would just tell me that I didn't have the abilities to open it. There is something with doors that cannot be opened in the beginning of a journey that is just so appealing. This door made me remember Attack on Titan. Directly in the beginning, we get to know about the existence of the basement in Eren's house and how his father would show him what was in it when he grew old enough. In the beginning, it wasn't something that we the viewers would care a lot about, but it soon became one of the main driving points of the story, knowing what was in the damn basement. For 3 whole seasons, it was building up a lot of tension in the narrative, and with the climax of the return to Shiganshina arc being the opening of the basement and learning the truth about the world they resided in, the story of Attack on Titan took a new turn that cemented it as one of the greatest animes to have ever aired. Ender LIlies was seemingly taking a similar approach to that, and it had me totally hooked. Another thing worth to note is the art style of the game. I am a real sucker for anything that looks anime-ish, but the game also took this dark gothic aspect into it. And I love the way Lili looks. She pretty much is the representation of purity. Her pale white skin and gentle appearance make quite the big contrast to the dark and bizarre environments she goes through. From then on, we actually begin playing the game. So I'll go over my experience with the gameplay itself. When starting, we have 3 abilities: jumping, dodging and attacking. The attacking itself also has its fairly unique spin on it, one perfectly fitting the character of Lili. The one doing the fighting isn't actually Lili herself, but the Umbral Knight. Lili is a pure, frail and young girl who doesn't want to commit violent acts, but is forced to go through these extremely violent situations. I love the detail of how she cowers behind the Umbral Knight every time he begins hacking and slashing at the enemy. Another thing I really love is that Lili, just by touching enemies, takes damage, and when she dies, she breaks into shards, showing just how fragile she actually is. By the time we can hear the first music notes, we also encounter the first aggressive enemies in the game, some jumping worms. These are fairly easy to deal with, but I still hated them throughout the whole game. They are just so damn irritating. Anyways, when you continue exploring, there will be 3 other types of enemies: a swordsman, a knight, and a kind of nun monster. When fighting the knight and the nun monster, I was able to spot one of my favorite mechanics in gaming: posture damage. The posture mechanic is one that you can see a lot in gaming. Just think of Sekiro or other Souls-like games. Every time there is a mechanic like that in a game, it invites the player to think strategically and or start having better timings when fighting enemies. I never even thought about the possibility of a Metroidvania to have the posture mechanic in it, so this came in as a big surprise to me. Going further, we are able to see our first save point, which is a bench. There we can see that the save points also work as the main operating basis of the game, where we can enhance ourselves, see memories, which are the cutscenes of the game, and some other things I will talk about later. Being done exploring the first area, we find the second save point, which is on the surface around a garden. The music cuts and we can only hear the sound of heavy rain. The next room we encounter the first boss fight in the game. While the fight was relatively easy, I did struggle a lot because I still had to get familiar with the game, as it was the first time I played a Metroidvania with a controller instead of keyboard and mouse. After defeating the boss and seeing its memory, we get introduced to the main gimmick of the game, the collecting of the spirits. All the abilities in the game are linked to the multiple spirits you can unlock. There are 2 different versions of these fights though. The first variant are the non-obligatory ones. These fights are just there to unlock new spirits to use in fights, with them also being able to help you with exploring, but they aren't mandatory. They also are just a stronger variant of normal enemies that you fight in the game, so they don't bring a challenge to the player. The second ones are the real deal though. These boss fights are the ones against named enemies, which also played a part in the lore that you can read in the notes. These fights are the ones that actually matter for the progression of the game, as defeating them will unlock abilities that are necessary for the exploration of the zones. The first boss fight will give you the ability to double jump, Elena the Dark Witch gives you the ability to breathe underwater, Ulf the Mad Knight gives you the ability to climb walls, and so on. Defeating them will also play a cutscene that is replayable in memories at the save points. By the time you defeat the second boss fight, you will also be acquainted with the relic system of the game. This pretty much is the same as the charm system in Hollow Knight. You have a set amount of space for relics that you can use, and each relic gives you a bonus. It goes from extra HP to higher jumps to extra EXP, and there even is a relic that decides which ending you will end up with. Relics aren't necessarily needed to finish the game, but they do help tons, even bringing new mechanics to the table, so I definitely would recommend going on a relic hunt. I also wanted to talk about the enemies in the game. There is a big variation of blighted in the game, each in correlation to the zones they reside in. In the dungeon where we go through first, we see worm-like monsters and knights. The forest and village zones are infested with humanoid monsters, wolves and big birds. The witch's thicket have these floral witch monsters and other magical beings. The castle is filled with knights and wyverns. You get my point. There are a lot of them. They all are unique and some of them need some extra thought before attacking them and no senseless hacking and slashing. One of the things that I felt when playing the game is that it is quite unforgiving at times. Ender LIlies definitely took in some Souls-like aspects in its game design, and I'm a sucker for this game's difficulty. I just love it when I finally am able to clear a zone or a boss fight after numerous tries. It just gives me that huge feeling of fulfillment. And speaking of boss fights, one of the other great things about Ender LIlies are its main boss fights. They all have big differences in terms of strategy and you most likely will never use the exact same setup to beat them. The first boss fight against the Guardian Sigrid was quite easy honestly. It was kind of sad to see that the first boss fight can be resumed as go behind the boss and start beating the hell out of it. But it had to be done like that as the first fight could not just straight up destroy us, while the only things we could use were the basic attacks of the Umbral Knight and Lili's dodging. The second main boss fight against Geralt the Warrior is more challenging to beat, but is still manageable within the first 5 to 10 tries. After beating him we also get our second red ability. Bosses not only give an exploration ability, but they also have a strong fighting ability that we can collect. I started making multiple setups in accordance to the strengths of these abilities. For example, Geralt has slow strong attacks that deal a lot of posture damage and has infinite uses. Elena the Dark Witch has ranged fireball attacks, Ulf has a chargeable attack that goes through armor, and so on. These red abilities are also the only ones which can use the limit gauge. The spirits then use all of their blight power to launch super attacks. Elena the Witch for one spawns a ring of fireballs that all home onto the enemies. And speaking of Elena, she was the first one to actually give me a bit of a hard time. She has 3 phases, with the second and third phase being the real problems. I had to pay a lot more of attention to her patterns, but it still was nothing too crazy. Up until that point I kind of breezed over the game, not really finding that challenge as sought. But well, that didn't last for long, as the following boss fight was the one I struggled the most against in my whole playthrough. The fight against Guardian Silva. Silva is actually the big sister of Sigrid, and at first I was elated to see that it was a callback to the first boss fight. The big difference between the two of them is actually that Silva is an experienced Guardian, as she was the Guardian of Lili's predecessor. So it made sense for her to be quite strong. But she was far more than that. She pretty much beat me up for 3 consecutive hours, and she was the first one to make me feel so frustrated while playing the game that I had to take a break. Silva in her first phase summons some fire arrows that target you, while she tries to hit you with her hammer, which is quite easy to dodge. The second phase is where the bullshit begins though. In this phase, she can fly up in the air to try to smash that hammer on you, teleports around the place and shoots a lot more of these fire arrow volleys. It took me a lot of time, but I was able to bring it down to the last 5% of her HP. But then I witnessed true horror. Just like her younger sibling, Silva transforms into her blighted monster form, and she gets a lot of new moves. She has a rush that pretty much one-shots you, shoots gigantic spinning orbs, and even has a move that covers the map with 4 huge pillars. The main problem I had with this boss fight was actually managing my health and healing. At the time I only had 3 or 4 heals, and with all the hits deleting like half of my HP or more, I sometimes started to panic heal. The third phase in itself isn't that extremely hard, but it's a combination of the occasional heals in the first and second phase and the huge amount of damage that Silva deals in the third phase that made this so damn difficult. So to finally deal with this fight, I had to learn to only start healing from the second phase onwards. I did try to keep it to a max of 1 heal in the second phase, and when entering the third phase I restricted myself to only heal when I was at like 10% of my health. I also started really looking at what relics and spirits I had equipped, trying to find the most optimal build for this fight. Something I learned from this boss fight is that your level and the relics you have equipped matters a lot more than what I might have thought. After more than 3 hours of constant struggling, I was finally able to beat her, and god, why did I feel thrilled with killing her. The next two boss fights are actually my favorites in the whole game. The first one is the fight against Ulf the Mad Knight. And god, what do I love this fight. The first phase is pretty easy, as he just will rush forward to try to hit you with some swipe attacks and occasionally will use a somersault attack that creates a blast going your way. The second phase is where the real deal starts. Here Ulf starts using his most iconic move, his cross slash attack. The move is a homing attack that spawns exactly on the player. Figuring out how to dodge it efficiently did take a little bit of time, but when I knew how to dodge it consistently, I felt extremely good and was in awe of how cool the move actually was. He also had another move where he just launches this gigantic energy wave towards you. The first times I kept trying to jump over them, but it just wasn't possible. What you had to do was dodge into the attack with good timing. With the final phase, Ulf gets even more aggressive as he starts turning around more, shoots the energy waves twice in one go, and has a new attack, one where he creates pillars of fire that come from the ground. I did learn the exact distances I should take to not get hit by the pillars, and looking back at it, had a lot of fun trying to dodge it. He still used the cross slash move, so there were a lot of things you had to pay attention to. One last thing that I really love about Ulf is that he didn't fight as a mad dog. Ulf was athletic. He jumped across the whole stage, ran up to you just to do a somersault and go back to where he was, as if to bait you into making reckless moves. When I fought him, I felt like I was playing against another player in a fighting game, where he would be mixing up his moveset and faking attacks and other moves. Quite ironic for someone called the Mad Knight. Due to you being able to climb walls now, we can finally enter the castle. And it's at the top of the castle, in the king's throne room, that we get to witness my favorite fight in the whole game. Knight Captain Julius is straightforward. In the first phase, the only thing he does is walk up to you slowly and try to stab you. He is really sluggish and it feels like he's totally exhausted. You can't really damage him when facing him, as he just will block your attacks. So what you should do is dodge his attack and start beating him from behind. In all honesty, the first phase is nothing compared to all the boss fights that we had experienced till now. It is more comparable to the night enemies that we fought in the game. It's in the second phase when the magic starts working though. As if reawakened, Julius starts moving faster, dashes forward and also leaps in the air. You have to be far more cautious when trying to hit him from behind after dodging his attack, as he now will be punishing you with a whirlwind ability and other stabs. Lastly, he will have another new ability, a big charge that lets him dash instantly to you. Learning how to dodge it is crucial, as this move does a lot of damage and is quite fast. The third phase was an epic climax to this fight. He starts his phase with a big blast and he and his lance are glowing crimson red. In comparison to the first phase, it feels like he was reborn. He was extremely fast, almost making it seem like he flew through the stage, had a lot more attacks and was far more aggressive. And his ultimate attack is definitely the coolest in the game. Julius starts concentrating energy in his lance and blasts everything that is in its way. The only way to dodge this move is to be behind Julius. I can't emphasize enough on how cool this attack was in the fight. Another thing that elevated this boss fight even more was the music. It was so damn epic and it just kept me motivated throughout the whole fight, and this being Julius' theme was really appropriate. When fighting him and hearing the music, I had the feeling I was fighting an actual knight with a responsibility, honor and people to protect, not some zombie that had been taken over by a calamity. His lore also made me appreciate His lore also made me appreciate this boss fight even more, but that is for another time. The next boss fight, Hoiner the Abysskeeper, was kind of meh. The first two phases he just jumps around and occasionally throws some knives towards you. The only thing that might pose a problem are the mobs that he spawns, but they also aren't all that. The last phase is also not really impressive, as the only difference now is that he runs around more and uses an air attack, cutting you some of your air movement. But it still is easy to handle. After beating this boss, you are able to get the first ending of the game, but doing this will also make you miss 2 other boss fights. The following fight is Miriel the Beloved, and it's a giant stationary boss fight. I love the fight as I had to make usage of a lot of things that I normally didn't use. First off, I had to use range attacks only. Coming close to Miriel is a bad idea as she will just swipe at you and take about 70% of your health away in one go. You also had to look out for all the projectiles she threw at you. Her first type of projectile is the ball that she barfs up. Depending on where it lands, you have to get close or far away from Miriel, as its explosion will pretty much kill you if hit. Her other main attack are the fireballs that erupt out of her. This attack is quite difficult to dodge because of the balls going off in random directions. And the last attack she has is one where she would make clouds erupt from below Lili, dealing huge amounts of damage. Miriel has 3 phases just like all the other bosses, but she doesn't really get new abilities. What does happen is that all of the abilities that I talked about before get even stronger. By the 3rd phase, the erupting fireballs feel almost impossible to dodge and Miriel chain spawns these clouds right under Lili, so if you have no idea of how to dodge that one attack, you can pretty much already start giving up. But I finished the game, so you know that I have the strategy at hand. To actually be able to consistently dodge the claw attacks, you will need Elena's ranged attack. The special thing about Elena's attacks is that she keeps you from falling. By having good timing and jumping at the right moment, you can completely dodge that one attack of Miriel's. I enjoyed this fight a lot as it made me have to think about a mechanic that I didn't really get to use a lot in the game. And now I can finally talk about the final boss fight, the Blighted Lord. And sadly, I have to be honest with you all. It was kind of lackluster. I had a lot of expectations after having witnessed 3 excellent fights like Ulf, Julius and Miriel, so saying that the Blighted Lord was also just a stationary enemy was kind of disappointing. But the thing that disappointed me even more was that the Blighted Lord himself was the biggest threat in his own fight. It were the little eye monsters that he spawned. These things hit like a truck and are just far too annoying to deal with. The Blighted Lord's attacks are pretty easy to see coming and dodge, but these little shits shoot mini fireballs that move extremely fast and do far too much damage instantly. When I was fighting the boss, it just felt like a cheap way to get damage in, and worse, it didn't really make me acknowledge the Blighted Lord itself. The attacks he used didn't really feel that threatening at all and were far too easy to dodge. The Blighted Lord has 2 phases, but they don't really change anything to the fights. The only real difference is the fact that these eye monsters will spawn faster, so you will have to deal with a lot more of them at the same time. The saddest part is that depending on what ending you are going to get, this will be everything that this boss fight has to offer. If you did manage to unlock the true ending, you will be greeted with another phase, where the Blighted Lord will have a new attack, one where it prays and gigantic fireballs start raining. But sadly the balls are quite easy to dodge and the core problem of the fight doesn't really change. The only real threat remains the eye monsters. The fight is also pretty much done from the moment you get the Blighted Lord to 30% of its health. It doesn't have the energy anymore to fight and just becomes a sandbag. The fight in its entirety isn't bad, but I just was expecting so much more from the final boss of this game that had me sweating so much. And that were all the boss fights. Even though I felt like the final boss fight left me hanging a little bit, they were all quite unique and got me invested into the game. Well, that was a lot, but now that I'm done talking about bosses, it's time to talk about another really important aspect of the game: the map and the environment. The map of Ender LIlies is decently big when compared to other Metroidvanias. It still does not compare to the likes of Hollow Knight, but you still will run around for a decent amount of time. The zones you go through all serve their purpose greatly. The places you go through at the start are pretty simple and do not really hold anything special, but they still have their unique charm. They also serve the purpose of showing us that the world is falling apart, as we see the growth of wildlife all over the structures. Starting from the Witch's Thicket is when things get really cool. The Witch's Thicket is an underground hidden city where all the witches reside in. When you start exploring it, you see how big the place actually is, and the music really fits the theme of a place made for witches. I said it was underground, but if you would look at it yourself, you would think that I lied. There's so much vegetation, a lot of waterfalls everywhere, and what seems to be some open sky. But no, you definitely are underground, making it all feel so much more magical. The deeper you go into the thicket and the more fantastic and magical the environment gets. Just having such an environment works wonders to show us that this was indeed the hideout of some intelligent magical beings. The catacombs are kinda special in my opinion. I never really felt anything grim when traversing the catacombs. The ambience in it was pretty laid back, the candles making it feel less creepy than what it should be. But at the same time, you still get reminded that you are going through a mass grave with all the skulls and skeletons lying around. But that's really about that in terms of aura that it made me feel. The Twin Spires and by extension the hinterlands were the two zones I had the most trouble traversing. But they were fantastic. When I climbed up the fortress and fought through dozens of enemies, there was one thing that I feel was conveyed really well. It's that we were climbing a fortress that should be extremely difficult to siege. I also loved the way they portrayed how big the fortress actually was. There were dozens of areas to explore and it's only via the Twin Spires that we can reach the highest point of the map. When scaling through the Twin Spires, you also start seeing more and more sky creatures. You see how everything begins to condense into the top, and most importantly, you see the void of the sky even more. They really wanted to make us feel how big the fortress actually was, and I think that they totally nailed it. The last zones I wanted to talk about are the Forgotten Domain and Abyss. These are the only places in the game where staying in it literally hurts you, as the blight is extremely condensed there. You need a relic to even be able to navigate through the zone, so it should tell you how dangerous it actually is. The zones feel surreal, with the blight having taken over everything. You have this pink to dark red color scheme going on, comparable to that of flesh. When going through the zone and actually taking your time to look around you, you also understand how evil and dark this place actually is. The deeper you go and the more the blight thickens and corrupts the environment. When trying to reach the final boss room, the only thing we see are these black vines and the dark red walls. The music also turns insanely tense and the environment, enemies, vegetation, they all just get darker and darker due to the Blight Lord's influence. The feeling I really think describes the zone the most is suffocating. I really loved how all these zones all just contribute so much to the world building, as Ender LIlies just doesn't put its lore to the front lines. One last thing worth mentioning is the emptiness in the world. There are no other entities in the game but Lili, the Umbral Knight and all the Blighted. No one seems to have survived the Blight, so it is up to Lili, a frail little girl, to save this apocalyptic world. Finally, I can talk about the last point of the video, and it's the music used in Ender LIlies. I really love its music, as it's through it that I even learned about the existence of this game. The group responsible for the tracks used in Ender LIlies is Mili. For people who are really into a lot of music originating from Japan, you might have heard of them. I also think that a lot of anime fans will be able to recognize their most popular song, Rightfully, also known as the first opening of Goblin Slayer. Mili is quite a unique group, as they only sing their songs in English while being Japanese. They also dabble in a lot of genres. They release classical songs, electrical songs, rock, jazz and more. And the crazy thing about it is that they always are able to nail it. They are really notorious, and them being involved in all the tracks used in Ender LIlies was quite insane to me. I legitimately never had heard of Ender LIlies before, but when I had my Spotify going randomly through Mili songs, I was introduced to one of the songs used in Ender LIlies, Bulbul. It instantly took my attention and I wanted to know what Ender LIlies was about, starting my journey through the game. The soundtrack never disappointed. I often would just sit at a save point to listen to the music or just let the game run in the background while I was busy doing other things. Mili and Binary Haze have nailed the music for this game. Every song suits their assigned part perfectly, and they help elevate certain moments to such great heights. I genuinely think that Ender LIlies soundtrack is a 10 out of 10. So yeah, these were all the things that I wanted to talk about today. I think that the lore and story of Ender LIlies should be set in its own video, as the game doesn't really try to explain it to us, and it is up to the player to take the extra step of searching for the notes and reconstructing the story. The lore and story are quite literally secondary in the game, but if this video does good enough, I might just try to drop a lore video. I do hope that you are able to see what I love about this game and might try it out for yourself. And for those who did already play the game, I have great news for you. Some weeks ago, Binary Haze teased us a new game set in the world of Ender LIlies, Ender Magnolia. So we officially got us a game series. Well, that was it for me. Make sure to like, leave a comment and subscribe to the channel for more gaming, anime or whatever content. This was Ortegana, until next time.
I gave it my all, isn't it supposed to be sunny now? But my rain won't stop, my rain won't stop. The hell I saw, voices I heard, the dreams that I